Welcome to Hello Player, a show for curious people who want an honest look at making a video game. I'm your host, Ava Carr, and in this episode, Charles and I will chat about how a small experiment with eye tracking grew into an industry-leading, groundbreaking set of accessibility features in HyperDot. We also have a few pals who are joining us today on the show, and with that, let's get started. Pals! Hello.
Hi.
This is the part where we introduce ourselves. I'm Holly. I am the marketing manager at Glitch.
And I'm Cherry. I am an accessibility specialist in the industry.
And both of you have been such huge and critical players in like the story of accessibility and how this all kind of got started. Charles, something that we have talked about in the past, and you say all the time, which it still blows my mind.
Sure.
You have said you didn't build this game for accessibility.
Oh, no.
And it was never a feature.
No, that was like, again, I started this game off as a student project that I only had 4 days to make. So I had no intent on like, oh yes, I need to make sure that this is fully compatible with everything. This was going to just be a one-off thing that I showed once, and then that was it. And then even if we wanted to extend that to be, oh, this will be the summer project, I wasn't planning on putting like going super full featured, especially even in just the game itself. So yeah, that was not my original intent, but because of the design philosophies and things, the game lent itself pretty well to that because like its minimalist nature. And
honestly, like, what did you all think about it when you first saw it? Like, especially Cherry, what did you think, when you first saw HyperDot?
Hearing Charles say that kind of blew my mind because, like, I had no idea. I think, was it you, Ava, brought me to the booth first? And so we looked at it and played. And then I spoke with Charles and I was just like, damn, like, this is so polished. Like, that was because normally when you hear that about like game jams or student projects, they can be impressive games, but they're usually not at all polished. And when I saw the game for the first time, even the demo felt so ready, which it usually doesn't go hand in hand.
Thank you so much.
I was kind of blown away by naturally how Charles had just got it, because normally I have to like give a big talk for people to get accessibility. So it was really impressive.
Yeah, you're right. I remember when I first saw and was playing the game, I knew I could see those design pillars that Charles talked about, the minimalism, the flexibility, but it wasn't until someone actually led me to, and it works with all of these controllers, that my like spine straightened up and I was like, oh really? That sounds like accessibility to me.
Yeah, so I was really skeptical. I'm just gonna say, like when you all told me that, I was like, we'll see.
Yeah,
and then I was like,
I love hearing that.
They did it.
Because I was actually really nervous reaching out to you, because Nicholas is our researcher in-house, but he was really focused a lot more on, like remote user testing and a bunch of other things. But accessibility was never really, something that we had talked about a ton in-house. And so I was like, oh God, Cherry's an accessibility specialist. I'm scared. We should reach out anyway.
Goodness sake, what do you think I felt?
Yeah, and the first,
oh my God, am I scary?
No, you're not. You're lovely.
I don't know. You wrote that pretty spicy Sekiro piece, but
you did. That was a very very spicy.
That was my spice turned down.
Like, it was. I know. I like off mic, off Twitter, Cherry. I feel like I'm like secretly texting people your hot takes. Like, listen, what Cherry thinks is bad. Originally designing the research before we took this turn, it was testing what accessibility and what flexible features were already there, rather than a broader test for what barriers people might be facing with the game broadly. So yeah, it was a big jump from being like, let's see how eye tracking works, to let's talk to an accessibility specialist about HyperDot.
Yeah, and Charles, what were you actually like? Since accessibility wasn't what you were designing for, what were you designing for?
Sure.
Like, what did you see when you were designing for this game?
Yeah. So, like, I did have some. Well, okay. All right, we're backing it up. We're going on.
Backing it up.
We're backing it up.
Back.
When you were 9.
When I was 9,
No,
I saw
we've already
this
done
idea of HyperDot. No. And it was called HyperDot all the time. When I was originally making the game, I did have some accessibility things in mind, largely because I read an article, or I didn't read an article. I went to the Able Gamers website that has like a list of things that are like minimal things, and I've read that years ago, and I was like, these are easy things to accomplish. Just keep these things in mind. So that has been something that I've had in the back of my mind for all games that I've been working on, but it wasn't like a focus or anything. And it wasn't until I added in eye tracking where that accessibility is actually a thing that I could pursue, because especially when people like encouraged me to explore that, because I wasn't exploring that all that much. I was just saying like, oh, well, all the enemies are specific shapes, and I want to make sure that, or so it's easier to identify them. And then I want to make sure that it like colors weren't super hard to see. That was really the extent of my accessibility research before eye tracking. And then I added in eye tracking because of a friend of mine, Lane Davis, who I work on another game on. But like he was like, oh, it would be really funny if you added in eye tracking. And then we're like, oh, that's actually a pretty good idea. So then 3 hours later, because the Tobii eye tracking setup stuff is actually really easy to implement. I was playing HyperDot with eye tracking. I was like, oh, this is a lot of fun and really weird because you're doing the opposite.
And so different.
Yeah, you're doing the opposite of what you normally do, which is you don't want to look at the shapes. But like when you're playing the game, you're looking at the shapes because you're like, oh, that's a square. I should run away from that.
Yeah, I remember when I first tried eye tracking, I was just like, I'm so terrified because, you're supposed to look at all of the shapes that are coming at you. But this was all about trying to find negative space. So it completely and entirely changed the way of play for me, which was actually super interesting that a different controller and a different input could drastically change the way that I interacted with your game.
Yeah, and that's what the original intent was like, oh, this is a novel experience. So I'll be like, yeah, I'll just include that because one, I'm just interested in supporting a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm interested in supporting a bunch of controllers and things like that just naturally because that's who I am.
So many controllers.
That
was like the first one that I had ever tried. And then the second one you like rolled over from your desk and you were like, it works with stylus.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay.
Yeah, because this might be because like I'm a diehard Vita lover and I'm a diehard Windows Phone person. So I love supporting RIP. I love supporting those odd. Well, not odd. They're not odd. Vita's not odd. But I love supporting, fully you're trying to feature all of the different, features that different platforms may use and things like that. So, even with eye tracking, later on, this was not initial, but later on, it supports things that a lot of other games that support eye tracking have. So there's this thing called clean UI, where if you don't look at the UI fades out so that the whole screen is clean and you're not focusing on those UI elements. There's only one UI element that you have to focus on, but I still wanted to put it in there just to be like, oh yeah, I want to make sure that I am actually doing my due diligence in terms of that ecosystem.
In terms of controllers, did you end up going from eye tracking to stylus, or what else was there?
There was a lot. I think it was from eye tracking to touch, and it was stylus.
Where's tilt?
Tilt. Oh no, yeah. I think tilt might have been before stylus.
Really important to the timeline.
Yes.
If only there was documentation.
If only there was. I probably have it somewhere, but I don't want to dig it up. Not now. But So then, it was. It wasn't until people were like, oh, hey, this is actually pretty good for accessibility reasons, and then me actually.
Who were those people?
I know that it was the Glitch team that was also.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if there were other folks that had ever like talked to you about that, because I didn't actually recognize it until like I was sitting there at my computer drafting up, a presentation for one of our partners. And I was just like, yeah, I suppose that makes sense. I had never thought about it in that way in terms of accessibility until I was writing it down. And since you had never talked to me about it that way, I was like, cool, lots of controllers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it was like I heard it more at like, that day that I implemented this, we had a local playtest event. So I heard that a couple of times that night where I was like, hey, this could be useful for accessibility. I was like, oh, cool. But I kind of, it didn't really like sink in that, oh, this is actually a thing that I could be pursuing like much deeper until like the Glitch team and like future things happened versus that day. Because I was just totally like, oh yeah, this is a novel experience. And that was gonna be it. But after getting encouragement from all these other people and everybody at Glitch and partners and things like that, we were like, oh, this is actually a thing that we kind of stumbled in, of like, oh yeah, there's accessibility in terms of like being able to support all of these different controllers and having the game react and be flexible. Like one of my pillars being flexibility is like, oh yeah, that is something that is super useful, not just in terms of the game design itself, but for everyone playing.
And like our biggest partner for this with Xbox was like, yeah, that actually seamlessly integrates very well with the adaptive controller. So that's how this at least got all started. And it was never, for me, it was never intentional. And
Sure.
it was clear that for you, it wasn't either, but it was just through some feedback and listening to people be like, yeah, this is a thing.
Yeah. No, yeah.
I thought that was really cool. And that led to a couple of other things like an ongoing partnership where, we're working on something with the adaptive controller as well. And it also led to us like frantically messaging our pals over at Xbox being like, can we be at E3 in a different episode? And we had talked about how like the HyperDot booth kind of became like the HyperDot plus adaptive controller, come try this out with all of these different things. And that's where I think really Cherry and Holly started talking and getting super involved in all of this.
Yeah, like you said, this spring we tested an installation together with our local Microsoft store. That was this self-guided experience with HyperDot using the adaptive controller and the 3D rudder foot controller. And we used that prototype to pitch our friends at Xbox, and they were like, yeah, come on down to E3. So
Come on down.
MVD.
Come
Yeah.
on down.
Right. So we had a booth at the Microsoft Theater right in the middle of a bunch of other Xbox titles, some really small, some really big, mostly really big. Yep. And we were one of the only booths that had an adaptive controller. And since we'd kind of centered our ask to be at E3 on that, when we were contacted, when we were talking to our partners at Mixer, that's what they wanted to talk to us about at E3 was they wanted to show off HyperDot being played with the adaptive controller, which was great because we'd been thinking about, like, at about the same time, all these kind of things funnel together. When we're approaching the end of development, Nicholas, Glitch's director of Insights, ID'd a few areas where we could do additional usability research, including accessibility. So all of these things were kind of lining up. And when Mixer asked that we showed off the adaptive controller in a live interview and talked about accessibility, we were like, cool, we're not quite there yet, but we do know someone in our circle who, well, not in our circle yet, someone on the internets that we really admire.
Yes, I think like you and I followed each other, Cherry, and we chatted for a hot minute at PAX.
Right. Yeah, it was it was another example of Evva being like, I'm going to ask this high profile person to do something, and me being like, good luck, and then it working out wonderfully. Because Cherry agreed to meet us at E3, play the game and talk about it at Mixer, and then come with us into the little like back room we had for exhibitors and talk about working together on research.
Come into our back room.
I very clearly remember being like, oh, all the seats are taken, and then going and sitting on the floor with you because that was all we could do.
In the corner,
yeah,
school children. It was great. I remember that phone call with Ava because here's a fun fact. I was super sick at E3. Like it was my second flu of the year. And I remember getting the phone call with Ava and just like really liking you on the phone so much. And most people I wouldn't just like drop everything in the middle of something like E3 and be like, sure, I can squeeze you in.
Cherry, no, you're going to make me cry. Stop. Thank you.
She has cry face. Keep going.
But like you called me and I was like in my hotel room with a fever. And I was like, yes, let's do this. This sounds so exciting. I was like, but no one touch me.
My terms are no one touch me.
I don't want to make anyone sick.
Oh gosh, well, I'm so thankful that you like came out and helped out with all of this. And I think that really led to our future collaboration on like the whole thing with HyperDot A11Y.
Yeah, so I think what happened was at E3 was I came in and like Holly said, we played the game and the focus was very much on the controls because that was the thing that was being showcased at the time and the thing everyone was talking about. And I had a lot of fun with the thing about the adaptive controller is that it's really nice and that in itself is such a flexible piece of hardware that you can plug so much into it that then it kind of like expands the game even more, like with the 3D rudder footboard, right?
Yeah, so, that you used with your arms.
Yep, blew our
yeah,
minds.
I was like, when you all told me that it worked with that, I was like, there's this thing I've always wanted to do, but I don't have one of these things because my legs aren't very strong. And so like, it's a bunch of money to spend on something I potentially couldn't use. So I was like, can I try this thing with your game? And you were like, sure, that sounds fun. So I tried to, it took us a minute to calibrate it, I remember. But then I used it with my arms, which was really fun. It was like physio. It was like you have to use your whole body to move the dot, which is so immersive.
So for our listeners, Cherry, like folks who are unfamiliar with what a usability specialist is and you and your work, could you share a little bit about like what your point of view was when you were coming into like these weirdos who had asked you to show up and this game being like, we think it's cool for accessibility.
I just want all the listeners to understand is I don't think you're weirdos. Like you're my people.
I think weirdos.
Maybe I'm weird. I don't know. Maybe weird. So I came in and I think the fun thing was there was like a lot of focus on the controls, which is obviously it's a really easy step into accessibility and easy step into understanding accessibility and what it means. But then I remember sitting and talking with Charles before I went back with Holly about like all the little things, the natural features of the game that I'd noticed and picked up on that I consider accessibility, even if they're not always considered like accessibility first, which is a lot of cognitive things like the kind of signals that where the shapes are coming from, the timers, like a lot of the UI and the minimalist UI, like all of those things contribute to cognitive accessibility as well as the physical accessibility of the controls. And then I also noticed that like, hey, there's like no colorblind barriers in this game, which is amazing because it's a game built on color and shape. But it really just goes to show that if you build in two axes of receiving information, then you have a really important redundancy there. And so I think the chat with Holly was like, I was just so excited because I'm so used to trying to teach developers that accessibility features aren't different to other features. They're all the same thing. Like usability is accessibility and vice versa. And so really it's about changing our approach to understand that the things that we do naturally for flexible design and usable design extend to accessibility. We just have to understand the experience of disabled players a little bit more. And the fun thing was, and the exciting thing for me was like, I didn't have to do that education. And so like, that's unusual for me. A lot of my work, I start off with education, kind of fundamentals of disability. I don't want to take up too much time on that, but it's usually like an hour's long talk on like how to think about disability, how to think about flexible design and inclusive design from the right frame set, which is in short, basically not trying to fix the disabled person, but trying to improve our designs. And then I kind of go from there and do a lot of analysis and then collaborative design with designers where we look at the barriers, I educate them on the barriers they have in place, and then we talk about whether they're intentional or not, because sometimes they are, like sometimes that's part of the game's fundamental design, which is fine. Like I think that's okay if those have accessibility problems, but then we talk about like, well, maybe we can mitigate them in some other ways. And then we find solutions, because the solutions aren't one size fit all. And I think that's really important to understand for games, games are just so vastly different from each other that everything has to be tailor-made, really. And so, there's a lot of collaboration in there. So I'm talking for so long, but talking with Holly through that, Holly then mentioned this research and I was like, ooh, I've been thinking about this for a long time. And like, there's these things I really want to try that I've always wanted to try with research, but haven't really had the opportunity. But in my work with AAA, I have worked on recruitment and guiding kind of ethical approaches to the disabled community. And so that's where my ideas for research had come from. And it magically kind of aligned with what Holly was relaying on Nicholas's ideas. And it was all just really exciting. And I think we just like frantically talked over each other while eating lunch.
That sounds
remember.
Great. And then I was like, what's the hashtag for your cat? Like it was business and pleasure. Yeah, it turned out that we were kind of circling complementary ideas, because Nicholas is a big proponent of the idea of doing research out of the lab, letting people participate where they're most comfortable in their homes, regardless of mobility. And that really fits well for getting a big, diverse group of disabled players to the virtual table to
so weird how this all worked out.
Yeah, and
I'm like, even just hearing this again, it's like so freaking weird how it all worked.
And
it was meant to be. That's what
it was meant to be.
Yeah, and I think we'd just incidentally been having meetings about research and about content for HyperDot, like back to back. And Evva, I think, was the one who made the connection. Like, why don't we do this research and do it in people's homes, but have them stream it so that it's like it's public facing and it's a marketing component, and that all just clicked together into what became HyperDot A11Y.
It's like your brainchild. Like between you three, it was like, I remember peering through the windows, hearing you all laugh, and I'm like, there's something magical happening.
Was my back to the window? Did I not notice you creepily peering?
Yes, all of you had your backs to the window. I still remember this.
I don't even remember there being a window. I was so engrossed in the conversation. I don't even remember what the room looked like, other than that we were in the corner on the floor.
I guess we should cover what we did.
Yeah, what did you all do?
A lot.
And that was the end of it all.
I think what happened from my perspective is that I'd already kind of worked on some AAA situations of getting disabled content creators into AAA programs for early access to gaming, games that were being released, in order for disabled content creators to give their opinions on the accessibility of those games, because it's so vitally important to the disabled community that they have that information before or like soon after release. And really, I have to say, like, unless you have that experience, you get it wrong. And even if you do have that experience, you get it wrong for other people. Like, accessibility isn't the same for everyone. So like one person that has physical disabilities can do an accessibility review, and that review may not be the right perspective for someone else with physical disabilities. Like, it might give them the wrong information. And so the more people we can get doing that, the better. And so that was some things I'd worked on already with Ubisoft and a couple other companies I can't talk about because, NDAs. And so when Holly was telling me about like doing it in people's homes and things like that, I was like, oh my God, this is such a good idea. Because another thing we'd struggled with in AAA is that in AAA, everything has to be done in-house because security and blah, blah, blah. It used to be that dev kits could go anywhere, but nothing's really done that way anymore because of the prevalence of leaks. And so getting a wide group of disabled people to a studio to do a user test is really difficult, even in big cities, because recruiting for those people is hard because not everyone's on the internet, and you know, it's a long story. But that was, as soon as you said marketing campaign, and then I think, Holly, you mentioned something about like mainstream content creators, and I was like, oh, what about disabled content creators? You were like, yes, we were thinking of that too. And I was like, okay, good. And then I think after E3, we went home and had a few meetings about how we would approach it and how to make sure we do it sensitively and ethically.
And intentionally.
Yeah, I think that was the beginning.
Yeah. Since Cherry, you're very plugged in to this community, and you'd been doing the work before for AAAs, you hooked me up with this list of people that you thought would be good fits for streaming, and I sent them cold emails that I think almost everyone then turned around and forwarded it to Cherry. They were like, is this person real?
I did get a few of those. They were like, is this legit? They're using your name. Exactly. I think the internet is full of so many scammers. Yeah. It was such a shame. I was like, but that's how you know you've made it, when people are like, is this real? This is too good to be true.
Yeah. And I think we were able to more than double that number in signups when we went public and said, like, this is what we're looking for. We want people to stream a little bit of HyperDot and just tell us what your experience was like. And yeah, the recruitment went really well. Cherry, you helped us a lot, like, to make sure that our form questions were like broad and ethical and sensitive. And so we got demos out to a bunch of people. I think ultimately it was maybe 15 people could make it work. And then it was just like 2-3 weeks of really weird hours watching all these streams. And it was...
But they were so dope.
They were so... Yes.
Oh my gosh, they were so dope.
So amazing. It was... They're also fun. They're also fascinating. And it was, I think, probably the first time Charles was seeing people stream HyperDot at all.
Yeah.
So
how did that feel?
Oh, man. I was really nervous about that.
What made you so nervous? What were you nervous about?
I mean, I was nervous about multiple things. I was like, I hope it doesn't break. I hope things don't like mess up and stuff. And then I was also worried, like, oh, what if they aren't able to play the game, or like, things go wrong, and I'm like, what do I do then?
Yeah, I know. I was bracing.
Welcome to my world. I just want to say, I have that feeling every time a game releases that I've worked on. I'm like, my name is attached to this.
I represent my community.
Right. I was bracing, and I didn't have the technical expertise to even help people if they did run into any barriers. I would have just been like, sorry, I'll DM Charles, restart your computer. Like, I was very afraid, and that just didn't happen.
Yeah. Which is, that in itself is just like, oh, things went relatively smoothly in terms of, like, the game didn't crash. People were able to play the game. And then they were able to, like, the goals that we were trying to reach in terms of, like, giving feedback and such, that was like knock out of the park. Like, it was amazing to, like, finally see my game be streamed, and it's not just on my computer. Like, it's not just like, oh yes, this is a thing that I have to be physically, like, next to in order for this to exist. But yeah, the first time to see a stream happen, and then to see it so that a majority of everybody having, like, no problems playing the game and such, or even
right.
There was one thing, and this is one thing that, like, of course, you get, like, all these positive like comments and things like that,
and then the one negative one sticks with you.
You're like, man.
Trackpad.
Well, no, it was.
Shoot! I brought up another one.
No, it was a person. Oh, I forget their name. But they had low vision. And on the dark levels, they couldn't see what was going on. Which, I mean, yes, that's technically the point, but you're still supposed to be able to play the game and be able to like, navigate and whatnot.
Yeah,
And I just I didn't know what to do to fix that. Like even on the spot, I was like,
The fun thing was I knew that there were barriers for vision. Like I knew there were big barriers. The barriers that I knew were there weren't as significant as I thought they would be. And people with extremely low vision were able to play way more than I thought they could, which was amazing. Because I think it really shows the resilience of disabled players and how freaking tough they are. Like, or we are that you just keep playing anyway and you just keep trying, and actually you are damn good at games because of it. But I knew about the dark levels. I knew some of the things that could be worked on, and I knew all of this, but I didn't say anything to any of the players or Charles because I didn't want to bias anyone.
Yeah.
sure.
And so I was just like sitting there like, don't type anything in chat. Just wait. Just wait till like the write-up.
Yeah, right. You probably saw me like live typing my like revelations, like, oh, of course, like putting your nose up to a screen that has a bright white level is hard on your eyes. Like, and Cherry is just silently in the background, like, yeah, I know.
Actually, so a fun fact about that, I originally, in HyperDot, there is a high contrast mode, and the original version of high contrast mode, I implemented it where no matter what the background color for the level was, I turn it to black, so that everything would be like, it would be really easy and obvious to say, oh, this is where shapes are and this is where your player is and stuff. I showed it off at another local playtest, and somebody who also had low vision was playing and was like, this is really hard for me to see. It would be nice if it was a white background.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, okay. So then I was like, okay, then I'll switch it over to be a white background. And then throughout the entire campaign of HyperDot A11Y, everyone was like, oh, this would be nice if this was a dark background. I was like, oh.
Dang it.
Oh, of course.
That's accessibility in a nutshell, though. Like, you can't get it right for everyone with just one thing. That's...
But
there's too much variation.
Yeah, I did love your solution, though, which was you had both options.
Yeah, so I was just like, yeah, here you go.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, no wonder you could do it so quickly. You'd already done it before. So overall, it was really cool. It was fun to watch people playing, even people who are having a hard time because the game is just hard. And also for people who are experiencing barriers more related to accessibility, everyone seemed to be having a good time and just genuinely enjoying the game, which wasn't the point, but that was fun.
Sure.
And that we were meeting our goal of carving out more space for people who don't fit an outdated idea of mainstream image of what who plays games and who should be highlighted by developers. So that was a win-win. And then we moved on to reporting out our findings.
We got a spreadsheet.
Cherry, you gave us a heck of a spreadsheet.
Oh, yeah.
I know. I hate spreadsheets, but like they're such a big part of my job.
It was such a good.
It's like people are like, you must really love spreadsheets. I'm like, they're just really good for communicating this information. Like it's really hard to get all these different things across in a way that people can pass, because you need to be able to kind of take a little bit at a time. You can't just like be given a thick document of here's all the problems. Like that's just such a, like no one likes to learn that way, I don't think. So yeah, spreadsheets. Yeah. Man.
I've definitely referenced the information you had on like the second tab too, when I've been explaining the updates that Charles implemented, going back and being like, and this is for cognitive accessibility, and let me read the right way to say how this is helpful and why. So it's a good spreadsheet. But both Cherry and Nicholas Cherry was watching the videos mostly as they happen. Nicholas was watching the VODs after the fact. Both independently kind of pulled together what they were seeing for barriers people were facing and recommendations on how we might address them. And then we pulled everything together, gave it a look. It was a list. I remember your email, Cherry. It was like, okay, so I found 32 things or whatever it was. And then you were like, but that's not that many. So it's okay.
Yeah. There's a AAA game I worked on recently that had, I reported 220 items.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
So,
32, Charles, 32.
It was 30 something anyway. And you'd helpfully already rank them for what would have the highest impact and what might be quickest to implement. And knowing Charles, who is a helper and a good person and likes to address problems in his game, we didn't show Charles the entire list.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Which to this day, I'm like, I could just leak it to him now
But still.
because I know that he wants it.
Yeah, and it was so tough too because during that time we were like knee deep in something else, and I cannot for the life of me remember what it was, but it was
trying to like pass cert.
I'm pretty sure it was cert.
Probably, yeah.
It's almost always cert, like
Yeah.
for everyone when
Yeah,
it comes to accessibility. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, we need to get through cert, but oh crap, there's all this stuff that we really are passionate about.
Yeah,
And,
exactly. And there were a couple of things that we were just having a really hard time with at the moment. And there was a negotiation that really had to happen between like, how does this fit into the production schedule and how do we address all of these things? Or at least are there ways in which we can start ranking some of them and what can we do quickly? What can we adopt quickly?
Yeah.
And still complete our current task at hand.
Yeah.
And if not, then are there ways that we can put it into the production schedule without compromising where we're currently at?
Yeah.
I know you had very strong feelings about this,
Yeah.
Charles.
I remember because Nick was like, "Do you want to see the list?" I was like, "If you show me the list, I'm going to do them."
Yeah, and I remember exactly just both of us looking at each other and being like, maybe we shouldn't show Charles the list. And we said it to you.
Yeah. I was
And we
like,
were like, how do you feel about that? Is that okay?
I'm like, if you show me the list, I'm gonna like, all right, I'm gonna try and figure out how to do all these things. And yeah, that was probably the better move because we needed to pass cert. But yeah, it was the second that I saw the piecemeal of, hey, these are part
we
of
give
the
you like
list.
a third of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a third of the list, and I was like, okay, well, that's it. I'm doing all of these things.
Yeah, it was like the
my
next
God.
day. Charles was like, anyway, so I did all of it. Yeah, in the same time that we weren't showing Charles the list, I was presenting at A11YTO and like got to the end of the presentation where inevitably someone would be like, and this is what we found. And I had to be like, I can't tell you because Charles doesn't know yet, and I'm not going to like share a secret with this group.
Before I even knew.
Yep. Yeah.
I think we also had a really important conversation about managing player expectations as well, right? Because as soon as that stuff is public, then you have a bunch of community expectations on you. And it can sometimes, from a development perspective, be difficult to deliver on that. And it's not always easy for players to understand why or how, even though like Glitch's community is so compassionate. There's always going to be someone that's a little bit disappointed or feels left out or like their needs aren't as important as others, when really the actual reality is it's not that their needs aren't as important. It's that we're trying to balance development priorities.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And even after we narrowed it down, we wanted to meet with you, Cherry, because we had some ideas about how to implement different things, but other stuff was just question marks. And we knew that it was high impact, but we didn't know how to approach it. So we got all those ducks in a row before changing what had been the sign up page for HyperDot A11Y into a page with like a letter from Charles and a change log of all of the accessibility updates in progress. And Charles had made them so quickly that when I finally got around to publishing the page, they were like all checked off already. It wasn't. I was like, there's a couple.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
Don't
for
be sorry.
Jeez.
Charles, don't be such an overachiever. Jeez.
I know, right? Why do I do this? Try hard.
Every single time we talk about this campaign, I think so much about like how much of an impact it's had on our industry, and I didn't know. Like I didn't know going in. And what was wild was I think just a couple of weeks ago, Holly, you had told me a little bit about what was going on with some of the research that EA had published.
Yeah, it kind of trickled in pieces. So first was A11YTO, which the TO being for Toronto, and A11Y, which I don't think we've said is the numeronym for accessibility, so shorthand. I was like in the second row texting Charles and the team, just posting in Slack, like every presentation is mentioning HyperDot. And like, I'm here to talk about HyperDot. And that's very weird.
No, that doesn't make any sense. Why are people talking about HyperDot? It's not us.
Yeah.
What?
I know. Like Bryce was showing like video of the campaign, and I was like, how did he get this? I don't have this.
Yeah, and Bryce is the director over at the Inclusive Game Lab.
Right, yeah.
At Xbox.
Yeah, leading folks behind the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And then it was through chatting with folks in this community that Ian Hamilton just kind of casually dropped, like, that EA kind of replicated part of this research, right? And I was like,
What?
Surely you were mistaken. And yeah, he pointed to a tweet that I had seen, and I hadn't understood the context. And then I circled back with James Berg, who is EA's senior user experience researcher, who said that he had something kind of in the works with the help of unnamed accessibility specialists, like to work with content creators on accessibility research, but it was the public part of HyperDot, the like marketing, public-facing campaign part, that made them decide to take their research for Jedi Fallen Order public and do the HyperDot thing. So from the smallest A to the biggest AAA,
what
ripple effect.
That doesn't make sense.
No,
you're not supposed to say HyperDot and then also say Jedi Fallen Order in the same sentence without it being me just saying, yes, Jedi Fallen Order, HyperDot. Like something like that. But no.
So the other day I was playing Jedi Fallen Order.
And then I was working on HyperDot. Yeah, that is
Droid
the only...
mini game when? That's what I want to know. Like, when is it getting put into
James,
Jedi
help us make that
Fallen Order?
happen.
I know, right?
Yeah. And then even when I reached out, I expected it to be kind of like, oh no, you're misunderstanding. It's a lot. It's like 3 jumps farther. It's like when we've like gotten a Google alert for HyperDot and been like, why is HyperDot in this like Call of Duty article? And then we're like, oh, because it was a mistake. But no, he provided a quote for a forthcoming piece in Xbox Wire, which was really nice and was like being very noticed by Senpai.
Yeah, just like, what? No, that doesn't. No.
There's also a lot of folks who, in terms of like players, tell me a little bit about what's been going on with the player side of things.
Oh, yeah. A lot of players really appreciated it, or particularly really appreciated the fact that we had that campaign and like reaching out to be to like that community and being like, yeah, we're looking to get your feedback and we're actually going to, and then turning around and then putting up that page and saying like, yeah, we're actually implementing your feedback. And that has been something that a lot of people have like reached out and said, oh, this is amazing. I forget who it was. I think it was Ian who was like, this is like my favorite page of the year so far.
Of the internet.
Of the internet.
Yeah, my like personal battle was like, it was so hard to format. Thank you.
And then make it screen reader compatible.
Right, like that was my battle I've seen. Yeah, and when the interview or the reviews started rolling in from Can I Play That, and Aaron Hawley, who goes by Geeky Gimp, posted this great video about HyperDot getting accessibility right. I was just kind of like a weird weepy mess because it felt like just, I mean, a really cool thing that we're doing for our jobs, but a drop in the bucket of all this work that advocates and players and experts have been doing for decades and decades, that we're like, oh, yeah, here's our little piece of it. And then, yeah, to see the way people were reacting to it was really wild.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I've seen so many of these players just like asking for this for years. Like they'll join early access, they'll join betas, they'll do everything like for free on their own time because they just desperately want to be included in all this and prove themselves. Yeah. And like we all know with content creation, if you're marginalized in any way, it can be really hard to get create a following and get the kind of notoriety and exposure that you need to be considered an influencer and included in these kind of programs. And so like I've just seen so much of the community crying out for that for like 4 or 5 years now. And so I think this is them finally feeling heard and seen, which is, I think, just so much more powerful than people give credit to in a way.
It's so wild just to kind of I feel like I'm connected, but I also like all of these things were happening just in front of me, and like due to, of course, like Charles's design, and then also like Cherry and Holly, all of your hard work in making all of this happen. It just feels so wild how much it's impacted this particular community, and I don't even know what to say other than like, thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for making your game, Charles. I don't know, like, thank you so much for spending time with us, Cherry, and being like involved with the work that we've been doing.
Oh my gosh, you're all so warm. I just like instantly felt like I'd found a new family. I was just like, oh no, am I getting too attached too fast? Is this weird?
Oh no, I don't have room for new friends.
No, I was more like, am I an imposter? Like, have I just inserted myself in this group of people? How did this even happen?
No, you were invited and you're loved. Stop.
Yeah, I can't even explain. Like, I'm like, I have to go call Cherry, and then like skip across the office. I'm like, I have the best meeting this afternoon. It's Cherry time.
Can confirm. Have seen you do that.
Yep.
And so for our listeners,
I'm gonna cry now.
And so for our listeners, does anyone have anything else that they'd like to say as we wrap up?
I want to say that in particular with players and what this like campaign has done for me personally is that like I've been shown a community that I haven't typically been shown, and it has been like enlightening and like inspiring to see the lengths at which people will go in order to like engage with the thing that they love playing. So just like just that spirit and whatnot is something that I want to like cherish and hold onto, and like not take that for granted and be like, oh, okay, yeah, there are people who are passionate about this, who are maybe not even in some cases being actively I guess left out in a sense, but like they want to engage, they want to play games, they want to do like engage with all these things, and it's that kind of spirit that I'm like, oh yes, I want to make sure that I'm not forgetting you. I'm not saying like, oh yeah, that's a thing that I have to do or something like that. No, I want to be able to provide a warm environment, I guess, to be able to play. Yeah.
Okay, so we knew that HyperDot was inherently pretty accessible, but knew it wasn't perfect, which is what made this research happen. And I know that kind of, especially in an era of like broadly like call out culture and stuff, it's afraid to be like open and vulnerable and be like, hey, we need people to look at this and we need help making it better. But I could not like just get partnered with an accessibility specialist who knows their stuff, and I can't. Like you couldn't ask for a better community to work with to playtest your game. So do it, and you'll be surprised at how easy some of these little tweaks are to implement that can make big change in how people experience your game.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I would like to say is, well, there's two really quick things. Is at the end, I think of every single person's stream, they were like, to anyone out there, to any other devs, we really want to do this more, like, please do this again. And that is like a really like important call to hear and not forget, like once the momentum's over, and for everyone to kind of keep this in mind as their projects move forward, like no matter how big or small you are. Like Charles is one developer and this happened. And then the other thing is like, I think the way, Charles, you talk about how you never set out with the intention of doing this. I think that is something that is one of these points that myself and Bryce, who is a really good friend of mine, sometimes disagree on. But I come from it from a very specific perspective, is that I think happy accidents count. Bryce doesn't necessarily, but the reason Bryce doesn't is because sometimes happy accidents happen and then everyone kind of pats themselves on the back and like, okay, good, we did it, and then like moves on and then forgets and doesn't necessarily keep that intention going forward. And I think like a really important thing to remember is happy accidents absolutely count, especially if you realize that and you work and are deliberate and kind of keep that teaching in mind. And because it is just like, it's like any game development or any game design teaching is you always got these little bits and pieces of knowledge going on. And this is just another tool in your box. And I think happy accidents count for that reason when you're deliberate about it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this call, Cherry, and also for Holly joining us in this episode. That's a wrap for the episode. So you can continue the conversation with us and the Hello Player community at discord.gg/glitch. And don't forget to subscribe to Hello Player on your favorite podcast app. Hello Player is produced by me, Ava Carr, Holly Harrison, Ben Hansen of MinMax, with music done by none other than Charles McGregor. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.